If you really want to get me riled up, all it takes is 3 words. Show, don't tell. This one piece of advice has destroyed more books than any other writing tip. In this video, I'm going to teach you what I've taught hundreds of other writers in my 17 years as a memoir writing coach. My clients have included journalists from the Wall Street Journal, Entertainment Weekly, the New York Times. The advice I'm going to give you is this: show, don't tell is a surefire way to ruin your memoir. So in this video, I am going to bust the myth that show, don't tell is good advice. How am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to go online and take the advice of writing gurus and show you their examples of showing, and explain to you why these examples are actually not good writing. I'm even going to go back to Anton Czechov's original explanation of show, don't tell. Now, Anton Czechov is credited with coming up with this advice in the first place, and I'm going to show you why his logic around this was all wrong. Finally, I'm going to talk about what actually makes prose good. So stick around, we have lots to talk about. Show, don't tell isn't always false. It works in magic. Okay, so I asked you to pick a number between 1 and 10. Show me your number. I picked 9. Me too. Ta-da! So I asked you to pick a number between 1 and 10. Tell me your number. I picked 4. 4. Me too. Ta-da! However, what works for David Blaine isn't necessarily going to work for Toni Morrison. Being a magician is very different than being a writer. A magician can show. A writer also needs to tell. In fact, for a writer, telling is often better than showing. So let's talk about why show, don't tell is dangerous. Well, for one thing, it is the most often quoted bit of advice on the internet. And for another thing, it is going to make your writing so much worse. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick search for show, don't tell. Now, I'm going to click on some of these links, but I'm not actually going to reveal the identity of the website. Why not? Well, I don't have a beef with any one person, with any individual. What I truly hate is false information, tips that are making your prose worse. So here's the first site that I clicked on. Let's see how they define show, don't tell. Show, don't tell writing is the process of creating a strong visual in the minds of the reader that will allow them to interpret what's happening rather than telling the reader what is happening. Okay, so showing includes a strong visual. Yeah, I would definitely agree that that's what show, don't tell means. On site number 2, we have this. Showing illustrates while telling merely states. Okay, I would agree with both of those definitions. And both of these writers go on to say that showing is a good thing. Okay, so when these writers start to give examples, that's when they lose me. Let's take a look at these examples. So, according to site number 1, one of these sentences is an example of strong writing, the other is weak writing. So I want you to ask yourself which one you prefer. Crunching hit my ears from behind, accelerating the already rampant pounding of my heart. Okay, that's example number 1. Here is the second example. It was eerily quiet on the road until the sound of footsteps terrified me. Which one of these do you like better? If I'm going to be completely honest, they kind of both make me cringe. But fortunately, the author of this article is going to tell us which one is better. It's this one, the showing example. Crunching hit my ears from behind, accelerating the already rampant pounding of my heart. So, if the showing one is better, why does it make me cringe? Well, for one thing, I don't really understand it. Crunching hit my ears. And for another reason, it sounds just kind of kind of cheap and over the top. Do you feel that? So this brings us to the first problem of show, don't tell. Showing writing has a tendency to sound insincere. For me, the showing example is just unnatural and exaggerated. It's lacking sincerity. It's trying way too hard. For me, it's lacking that thing that makes writing so incredible, so emotionally affecting, so special. That thing that transports you and makes you forget you're reading a story. For me, I am seeing words on the page and I don't get lost in the story. So how would I fix this? Honestly, I would disregard the showing version altogether. I would take the telling version and rewrite it slightly. So here is my rewrite. It was eerily quiet on the road. Then footsteps. So for the sake of argument, let's just say that maybe I clicked on the wrong site. I clicked on the site of someone who really doesn't understand show, don't tell. Well, I will say that site number 1 does get over 20,000 views a month. But let's just assume that we're going to get better information from site number 2. Okay, here's the first example that the writer of site number 2 gives as to why showing is better than telling. Here is the showing example. As his mother switched off the light and left the room, Michael tensed. He huddled under the covers, gripped the sheets, and held his breath as the wind brushed past the curtain. Okay, and here is the telling example. Michael was terribly afraid of the dark. So I think the showing example is actually better than the previous one. But don't you still feel like something is off about this writing? For me, it has the same problem as the previous one in that it lacks sincerity. It's missing that thing that moves me as a reader, that makes me forget I'm reading a book and transports me. It makes me part of the story. For me, I am still just reading words on the page. The problem with this one is that it feels kind of generic. And that is a common problem with showing versus telling. Why is this the case? There are only so many ways that you can give me a visual of someone being scared. Showing tends to result in generic writing. And generic writing is boring writing. As his mother switched off the light and left the room, Michael tensed. He huddled under the covers, gripped the sheets, and held his breath as the wind brushed past the curtain. It's okay. Not great. But there's a much bigger problem with this excerpt. Okay, so I do visualize this moment. I see a scared little boy. But here's the problem. The writer has assumed that what I want from a book is a visual experience. And I don't think that's the case. What I as a reader want is an emotional experience. And for me to have an emotional experience as I read this book, I don't need to visualize Michael being afraid. What do I need instead? I need to actually feel fear. A visual experience and an emotional one are two really different things. And the first rarely leads into the second. So what actually makes for good prose? What creates this emotional experience? To get the answer, let's turn to the writing of novelist Toni Morrison, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature. This is how Toni Morrison describes fear. In the back of the wagon, supported by sacks of squash and hills of pumpkins, Shadrach began a struggle that was to last for 12 days, a struggle to order and focus experience. It had to do with making a place for fear as a way of controlling it. He knew the smell of death and was terrified of it, for he could not anticipate it. It was not death or dying that frightened him, but the unexpectedness of both. So I love that. Let's separate the showing from the telling in this example. Where is there showing? So I see showing in half of the first sentence. In the back of the wagon, supported by sacks of squash and hills of pumpkins. That's it. That is the entirety of showing in this passage. So I would say it's about 20% of this passage. The rest of it is telling. So there is nothing wrong with showing. Toni Morrison is doing a little bit of that here. But the problem is that the advice says show, don't tell. So maybe instead it should say show 20% of the time and tell me the rest of the time. But I guess that just doesn't roll off the tongue. I'm going to talk about the fourth problem with show, don't tell in just a second. Before I do, be sure to check out my free class on how to craft your memoir from the ground up in just 7 steps. You'll find a link in the description. You'll also see a link to my most recent book, The Memoir Engineering System. Make your first draft your final draft. Okay, let's look at website number 3. Another place where showing works much better than telling is to reveal the personalities and prominent traits of your characters. Rather than telling us what they're like, show us what they're like through their dialogue and their actions. So the writer is saying that we understand a character better through showing versus telling. And this is the example that that writer gives us. Meredith set up her lemonade stand right outside the baseball stadium, knowing you'd get more foot traffic than on her quiet block. So, according to the writer of this article, the reader can deduce the same information they'd get from the telling example, but in a much more compelling way. Okay, so if that is true, I should be able to read this showing example and deduce what the author is trying to tell me, right? But can I really? So let's look at that showing example again. Meredith set up her lemonade stand right outside the baseball stadium, knowing it'd get more foot traffic than on her quiet block. So what is the writer of this article trying to tell us about Meredith? What can we deduce about Meredith's character traits? Now, I haven't cut this down at all. This is the entirety of the example that the writer gave us. Well, personally, I can come to a lot of different conclusions. One of them is that Meredith is desperate to make money. Maybe she's poor. Another conclusion I could draw is that she has this need to impress her father, or this need to do something to help out her family. I might also assume that she's probably not the world's best business person because she's doing the most cliche thing that any kid can think of when it comes to making money. So what do I want you to take away from this example? It's that showing is not getting your message across in the same way that you think it is. It's not as obvious to your reader what they're supposed to take away from this example. It's getting images across, but that is not the same thing. So according to the writer of this example, the conclusion that should be obvious is this: Meredith was clever and ambitious. But honestly, that is not the first conclusion I drew when I read this example. So if this were my book, this is how I would describe Meredith. Meredith was only 8 years old, so she still didn't know a lot about business. She understood the power of location, which is why she set up her stand near the baseball field with its high foot traffic. But she decided to sell lemonade, which every kid thought was a great idea when they first started out. She didn't yet understand the power of a unique idea of standing out from the competition. She would have to learn the hard way. Basically, I'd use a whole lot of telling. So another problem with showing is that your reader is rarely getting the point that you actually want to make. This is such a huge problem that we even see it in the writing of Anton Czechov, the writer who is credited with coming up with show, don't tell in the first place. Here is the very first reference to show, don't tell in recorded history. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. For instance, you'll have a moonlit night if you write that on the mill dam, a piece of glass from a broken bottle glittered like a bright little star, and that the black shadow of a dog or a wolf rolled past like a ball. So, when you hear a piece of glass from a broken bottle glittered like a bright little star, and the black shadow of a wolf rolled past like a ball, do you immediately think to yourself, oh, it was a moonlit night? Personally, I don't. The whole concept of show don't tell was flawed from the very beginning. I honestly wonder how the world would be different if someone had said to Czechov, you know, Anton, when you're talking about this shadow of the wolf rolling past like a ball, do you think people are really going to get that it was a moonless night? Oh, and by the way, are you sure that a ball running past is the best way to describe a wolf's shadow? So why are people telling you that show don't tell is a good thing? Well, for one reason, there are a lot of people out there who want to create content, and they don't have original ideas, and so they copy one another. People copy one another even when the ideas are wrong, and those bad ideas spread. So another reason that show don't tell has spread is because it actually does apply to screenwriting. In film, all you have are images to tell a story. All you have are visuals, so you need to figure out a way to take those images to create an emotional experience. But that is just not the case when it comes to writing memoir or fiction. Words are our tools, and words are incredible. They can do amazing things. Why limit yourself to showing with words when telling is just so much more emotionally effective? To me, this is kind of like being a seagull who decides he's going to spend his entire life getting around by walking. But a seagull has wings. Fly, birdie, fly. There is so much bad advice out there, and if you are not careful, it will make your memoir worse. The only thing that saves you, you need to be able to think for yourself. The easiest way to do this is to take the advice you're getting and see if it holds up in the real world. Go to your favorite authors and see if this advice applies. Personally, I don't see show don't tell in the writing of Toni Morrison. So if the tips you're getting about writing don't make sense, it's probably a good sign that the writer has no idea what they're talking about. If it looks like a turd and smells like a turd, it's probably not a Snickers bar. What, this? Oh no, this actually is a Snickers bar. Be sure to pick up your free memoir class by clicking on the link in the description. And if you want to know more about what actually makes prose good, check out this video. Your goal is to give your reader an emotional experience, not a visual one. I talk about it in this video. Click on this video to learn how to write emotionally affecting prose that a reader will love.